All right, let's get right into it. We're tackling a massive controversy out of Minnesota that all started with a cell phone video and then just exploded into this national debate about taxpayer fraud. We're going to break down all the claims, the political chaos, and the media firestorm, and just so we're clear, everything you're about to hear is pulled straight from the source materials. So it really all boils down to this one huge question. How in the world did a few videos from a single YouTuber manage to light a fuse that became this national firestorm over public money? It's a wild story, so let's dive in. We're going to deconstruct the actual allegations of fraud piece by piece. Then we'll look at the pretty intense political reactions and really dig into how the media's own coverage became part of the story. You'll see pretty quickly this thing has a lot of moving parts. Okay, so to make sense of all of this, here is our game plan. We've got 5 parts. First, the viral investigation itself. Then, the specific fraud allegations. After that, the political response. Then, how the media was put under the microscope. And finally, we'll zoom out and look at the deeper history behind all these claims. So, let's kick things off with Section 1, the viral investigation. This is literally the spark that lit the whole fuse. The guy at the center of all this is Nick Shirley, a YouTuber and citizen journalist. His whole method was, pretty straightforward. He just went to a bunch of daycare centers in Minnesota's Somali community with his camera rolling and tried to ask basic questions like, hey, how do I enroll my kid here? What he filmed, and what went massively viral, was a pattern of locked doors, empty buildings with no kids in sight, and what he called really evasive answers. We're talking hundreds of millions of views. It was huge. Which brings us to Section 2. How did these videos actually turn into these really serious allegations of fraud? What were people actually claiming was going on here? Okay, so let's talk numbers, because this is where things get pretty wild. In one of Shirley's videos, he hones in on this one single facility that looks completely deserted. Well, the sources claim that one location received a staggering $5.9 million in public funds. And get this, that was in just a 2-year period. And it wasn't just him saying these places were empty. The videos featured interviews with people who lived nearby. In one clip, a neighbor of a daycare, one that supposedly got almost $2 million in 2023 alone, is on camera saying, I've been here since 2017. I haven't seen anybody, never seen a child here. So the videos started to build this really compelling list of on-the-ground details. You had daycares that were supposed to be licensed for almost 100 kids but looked totally empty on a weekday. There was that one famous sign for the Quality Learning Center with learning misspelled. Things got tense, too, with some residents confronting Shirley thinking he was an ICE agent. And then there was the bizarre detail of phone numbers for these businesses that either didn't work or in one case supposedly went straight to the governor's office. Now, the sources are quick to argue that this isn't some new scheme. They point back to surveillance footage from an older case in 2018 that they say shows exactly how this alleged fraud works. Here's the breakdown. First, the daycares sign up low-income families who qualify for state help. Then, the video seems to show parents checking their kids in, and then walking right back out with them just minutes later. The center then bills the state for a full day of care that never happened. And finally, other footage supposedly shows a man handing out envelopes of cash, the alleged kickbacks for the parents. As you can imagine, a viral storm like this was bound to get a major political response. So in Section 3, let's look at the official reactions and accusations, all pulled directly from the source materials. The biggest reaction by far came from Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz. When he was asked about the videos and these fraud allegations, his main response, which the sources highlight again and again, was to frame the whole thing as a racist attack. He said, "This is what happens when they no longer hide the idea of white supremacy." So what you have here is just a complete clash of realities. On one side, Governor Walz argued that focusing on the Somali community was just scapegoating, and he pointed out that white men commit the majority of crime. The counterargument from the YouTubers was, well, that ignores per capita stats, and it's not scapegoating if you're just exposing a real problem. When the governor talked about needing to educate people not to commit crimes, the response was basically, hold on, aren't you, the state government, responsible for not sending out fraudulent checks in the first place? All right, let's move on to Section 4, Media Under Scrutiny. The source materials really spend a lot of time zeroing in on how the mainstream media reacted to all this, especially their so-called fact checks.
And this really shows the disconnect, right? One source points to a CBS News fact check that found, hey, most of these daycares have active licenses, and state regulators had visited them. But the YouTubers' comeback was, that's our entire point. Their accusation was that the state government was in on it. So from their view, a state-issued license doesn't mean anything if you think the state is part of the problem. They were saying, look, the whole reason we're doing this is to expose the fraud before it gets officially recorded.
The scrutiny also locked onto comments from individual reporters. This quote from a political reporter, Josh Gerstein, got a ton of backlash in the source videos. The way they saw it, his comment about citizen journalism and stand your ground laws wasn't just an observation. It was a pretty thinly veiled threat, suggesting that people like Shirley could, or maybe even should, get shot for just knocking on doors. So did this whole thing just appear out of thin air? Or are there deeper roots here? In our final section, we're going to dig into the history of these kinds of allegations, at least as it's laid out in the sources. According to the sources, worries about this kind of fraud are nothing new in Minnesota. They lay out a timeline showing that back in 2017 and 2018, the state's attorney general was actually investigating and prosecuting these cases. That's when that surveillance footage we saw earlier first came out. But then, the sources claim, after Governor Walz and the new AG Keith Ellison came into office, those state-level investigations just kind of stopped. They argue this created an environment where fraud could fester for years, right up until Nick Shirley's videos blew the lid off in 2024.
Well, all that viral attention did get a federal response. The sources made a big deal out of statements from Attorney General Pam Bondi, who confirmed the Department of Justice has an active investigation. And she gave some hard numbers. 98 people have been charged so far. Of those, 85 are of Somali descent, and more than 60 have already been found guilty. She wrapped up with a pretty clear warning to state officials, saying, "Buckle up, lawmakers."
To make the case that this is a much bigger systemic problem, the sources look beyond just childcare. They point to this massive explosion in Medicaid autism claims in Minnesota. Apparently, it shot up from just $3 million in 2018 to $399 million in 2023. They present that number, a jump of over 13,000%, as potential evidence of widespread organized welfare fraud across many different state programs. And this quote, which the source materials attribute to former White House advisor Stephen Miller, pretty much sums up how critics see this. He calls it the single greatest theft of taxpayer dollars through welfare fraud in American history, and flat out says the state government has been fully complicit. So at the end of the day, when you boil it all down, this whole story is really about the clash between a few powerful forces. You've got the rise of citizen journalism, the raw power of political accusations, and this fundamental battle over who you trust to tell you the truth. And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. In our world today, where a video can go viral in a heartbeat and our political divides feel like canyons, how do we even define what's true anymore? And maybe even more important, whose job is it to defend that truth?